Hello and welcome to Sam's Fans Live. We are broadcasting to Facebook and YouTube. So wherever you are joining us, welcome. We're just going to take here a few seconds as people join the broadcast. So if you are joining, say hi in the comments so we know who's watching. I am really excited for this new series of live streams that we're bringing to you via Facebook and YouTube. You may have seen some of our previous live streams in the past couple of years where I talked to music and art therapists, and we discussed a lot of the research, and we also talked to some of the partner hospitals from Sam's Fans, and it was overall a great experience for me. We are now bringing you a new series of live streams that is going to last for 2 months. It's going to be happening every Thursday at noon Eastern Time. This series is called The Power of Stories, and it is a series of interviews in which I will be chatting with therapists from the partner institutions that Sam's Fans supports. Sam's Fans started with a story, the story of Sam and her family. I am amazed at how much love, resilience, struggle, and courage there is in that story, as I experienced and learned better in an earlier interview and the inaugural session of The Power of Stories with Nikki earlier this year. Nikki has been able to transform that story of struggle and profound sadness into a beautiful mission to bring music and art therapy to seriously ill children and their families. So I hope that you can listen along to The Power of Stories as we talk today with our guest, Ella Guillard, and the stories she has to share with us. Ella is currently a board-certified music therapist on the Behavioral Health Unit at Dayton Children's Hospital. She is also earning a master's in music therapy in the inaugural class at the University of Dayton. She is proud to have served the Greater Dayton community's children and adolescents for nearly a year and a half now. So let's welcome Ella as she joins us for this live stream. Hi, Ella. Oh, let me unmute you.
Hello, how is everything?
Good. How are you?
Good, thanks for asking.
Yeah, it's great to have you again. We had you, I don't remember if it was last year. I probably was last year or 2
I
years
believe
ago.
so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's good to have you. Yeah.
Yeah, time flies.
Yeah. I see that Nikki is watching, so hi, Nikki. And if you're watching, feel free to let us know so we can say hi to you. So, Ella, it's great to have you. I would encourage other people to take a look at the previous live stream with you because we talked a lot about the program at Dayton Children's and what you're doing over there. And I remember it was a great conversation. We have Julia Meeker also saying hello. Hi, Julia. And Lisa. Good morning from Massachusetts. Hi, Lisa. Yeah, so if you haven't seen that interview, I would encourage you to go check that out. But Ella, why don't you tell us a little bit about what's been happening at Dayton Children's the past year? Obviously, like with all of our hospitals, it must have been quite the ride. So do you mind giving us a bit of an update?
Yeah, of course, because of the pandemic, things have been a whole lot different. We have masks all the time, so mine is right on the table right next to me. And we usually have shields on as well when we're patient-facing, working with patients. Of course, we've all had a few COVID tests, make sure we're negative, and then they're still screening us every morning to make sure we don't have any COVID symptoms, staying home if you're not feeling well, all of those kinds of things. So it's definitely been different on the unit. We've had a lot more cleaning, as I'm sure you can imagine, a lot more with wet wipes, making sure surfaces are clean, keeping instruments clean for myself and for the new music therapist we have on staff, which I'll be able to share here in a few minutes. And so it's definitely been different. We've been trying to use the bigger group rooms on the unit and keep the kids a little bit more socially distanced. They're all masked as well. So it's a different dynamic, not being able to see, you know, facial expressions and smiling, and being able to walk around without a mask on is a different experience for sure.
Yeah, that is for sure different. I mean, I've done a bit of clinical work with a mask in a hospital, but now that you're mentioning that patients are also with a mask, that's a bit of a new thing. And yeah, like you said, like not being able to see their facial expressions, and it's just a different dynamic. Were you able to do live streaming at any point, or not live streaming, but telehealth? Yeah.
No, the hospital, I believe, because of the nature of our unit and because it's for kids who are in, you know, crisis mode, we haven't done any like telehealth therapy or anything like that because we're all inpatient all the time.
Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. Mandy's watching as well. Hi, Mandy.
Oh, that's awesome. From the same fans office. That's cool.
Okay. And were you saying that there's a new music therapist?
There is a new music therapist. So all of us on the unit, including myself, are activity therapists, which is why we all have the bright green. And a few months ago, we had another activity therapist transfer to another hospital and position and things. And so we had an opening. And we ended up interviewing Tyler Perry. He's an MTBC as well. And thought he was a great fit, loved having him, and it's been wonderful having him here. He went to school at Immaculata University outside of Philadelphia, PA. And so it's been nice to have a guy activity therapist, have another music therapist on the unit, because I see Lindsay Steinbrenner, she's been on Sam's Fans as well. I see her every once in a while, but it's different when you work with somebody on your unit and have another resource and things like that. So it's been really nice having him. Yeah,
that's great. I remember Tyler, I think we connected at some point via email because he was looking for a job in Ohio.
That sounds great. Mm-hmm.
So that's great. I'll have to have him on the show at some point.
Absolutely. Yeah, we were thinking about maybe doing some collabs at some point, or wondering how we can work with Sam's Fans as a team and talk about, you know, maybe our approaches and how things are different, you know, having two music therapists and all of that kind of stuff. That could be a whole other conversation at some point.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I love it. So as I was mentioning, this new series is really focused on this idea of stories. And I thought it might be good to start with asking what is your story and what sparked you to become a music therapist, and how that has developed from the initial spark to where you are today. So what do you think?
Absolutely. As I got into music therapy, I ended up finding out about it in high school. I was pretty big into band and choir and things like that, and always had an interest in working in the medical field because I spent 3 months and 2 days at Akron Children's as a premature baby. And so I knew that about my history, but also didn't feel all that connected with nurses or with becoming a doctor. It felt like something I might enjoy, but not 100%. And so when I heard about music therapy, that's really what sealed it in for me, as like, absolutely, I want to do this. And especially working in more of a healthcare setting as opposed to, school or prisons or all different kinds of settings that music therapists can be in. And so as I went along, I went to Baldwin Wallace University right outside of Cleveland, and they have a real strong program for music therapy. And as I went along there, I was able to do some practicum experiences and begin really working with people, and found that I liked a lot of different populations, a lot of different groups of people, people with developmental disabilities, people with psychiatric disorders, all different kinds of things. But I still really enjoyed the hospital setting. And so then when I got into my internship, I also had a complete mix of populations, preschoolers all the way on up through over 100 years old in hospice, and still found that I enjoyed the hospital setting and at least some form of medical setting the most. And so it was a great fit then for me to come into Dayton Children's, with Lindsay already establishing music therapy, but then having this need on the behavioral health unit that was really just a few months old at the time. I believe the unit opened in July or so of 19, and I started in September. So just a few months in, really being able to bring in music therapy to a group of kids that in many ways probably would not receive music therapy on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. No, that's great, and we're very proud at Sam's Fans to support the music therapy program at Dayton Children's. And for those of you watching who don't know, we started supporting Lindsay, who was the first music therapist at Dayton Children's, and then the hospital sort of took in Lindsay and into the budget of the hospital, if I'm not mistaken. And then we started supporting the new music therapist, Ella, in the behavioral unit at Dayton Children's. So we're very, very proud to partner with you.
Absolutely. It's a wonderful, coalition, and being able to cross music therapists and bring others in and be able to expand with the hospital and with Sam's Fans. It's very much needed on both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah. I have a kind of fun question regarding stories. I was wondering if you have, do you have a story, whether real or fictional, that does not have to do with music, that has influenced you?
A story, real or fictional? I think one of the things I talk about with the patients a lot is how much stories teach us. And even with the ones that are fictional, there's usually some kind of reason that we continue to tell them. And I don't know that a lot of us pay a whole lot of attention to those meanings in stories. It's just like, oh, we know the Three Little Pigs, or we know Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and all different kinds of, the Disney stories. And yet those all have meanings. And even some children's songs, talk about the Black Plague or all different kinds of things. And so it's always interested me that a lot of stories have historical significance and meaning and are teaching something while also being entertaining. I think that's, as I've gotten older, I've paid more attention to the stories that we tell, especially younger people, and why that is. With Hansel and Gretel not going into the woods, and scary animals and people and strangers coming to take you, and all different kinds of things that it's like, I don't know that I myself ever really paid attention to the meanings of them, and how important that would be. So that's something that I think about a lot, even when doing a lyric analysis, going through the words of songs and talking about it. Many times it's similar to stories or poems, and there can be, meaning that hits us differently at different times of our life, and we're able to interpret them in different ways depending on how old we are and what we're going through and all different kinds of things. So it's interesting that stories can morph and change and yet have some form of consistent meaning all the time.
Yeah. This is Mary Lou, a Sam's Fans supporter, and she's watching from Las Vegas. So hi.
It's Nevada.
It's
Wow.
awesome to have you. Yeah. I agree with you, and I know that there are also things like narrative therapy where they really take a look at stories, and they either craft stories with the patients, or they share stories and kind of work with therapeutic goals around stories. So I think that there's definitely a power to those stories, not just within therapy, right, but beyond. I mean, why do we keep telling stories that are hundreds of years old or thousands of years old? I think that's just how we're wired to understand.
Absolutely. And even with Sam's Fans, that's a story in and of itself of Sam not only being the kid, but then also her family and her story, and multiple different offshoot stories of her life and how things changed and what she did. And that's all, and then organization, foundation has its own story and offshoots, and it's interesting to think about for sure.
Yeah, that's the power of stories. And talking specifically about music and art therapy stories, and well, really therapy stories in general, something that is very important for us to consider always, it's ethics, and particularly if it's the stories of patients, like being careful about how we share, or if we share them and what we're sharing. And for us at Sam's fans, we have a lot of patient stories, a lot of testimonials and photos and videos. So we always make sure that we have appropriate permissions and we're handling the stories with the attention and care that they deserve, right? So what would be your personal take on music therapy stories? Like, how do you like to share them, if at all? What power do you think they hold? And do you, I don't know, do you usually tell stories even when people are asking you about music therapy? Like, what is it? Do you sometimes think about telling a story? How do you approach that?
Yeah, it's definitely a sensitive issue, regardless of where you're telling the story or who you're telling it to. Even with music therapy professors, I try to be respectful of names, and they may know the context, but I really try to watch with names and specific details, because it's not my story to tell, it's the patient's. Even though I was involved and around, it's still really theirs. And so I'm very cognizant of what I share and why and how. I think with that in mind, I'm able to share more anecdotal stories because I don't have to share names. I can just say he and she and this patient or this kid, and it can be easier that way. But it all depends on who you're talking to as well. How maybe the influence that they have or what they're aware of, and making sure that I tailor the story or explain music therapy in a way that makes sense to them, because it can get very clinical very easily. And so it's something that I am aware of, but also want to share some stories because it really demonstrates what music therapy does. So it's a fine balance, but with taking as much information out as I can, I find that I'm still able to communicate the same main idea, even if they don't know that the kid's name is David, or if I give them a pseudo name, or that honestly doesn't matter as much as what happened with the kid in the moment and how they reacted. And that could be anybody on the planet that's had that experience.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure important to leave out any identifying information. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing also for us at Sam's fans, and even when you think about fundraising, because that's really what we do as Sam's fans, we fundraise for these programs. And then in this line of work, it's pretty clear that stories that also come along with pictures or with a bit more specifics are even how to say this, they go further in terms of people respond better to them, because they can see that there is a real individual there behind that story. And that's kind of like the balance that we at Sam's fans always have to maintain, right? Being respectful of the stories of patients and making sure everything is ethical, and we tell a lot of stories that do not have identifying information, but then sometimes we do have these hero stories of patients and families who decide to take that step and share their stories with us and with the community. And sometimes the response is unbelievable. I mean, we even stay in contact with some families who have shared their stories and who become really close to Sam's fans, and they almost become part of the family, right? And there is a way to do it kind of sensitively and ethically, right?
And we're in a very unique position as a behavioral health unit, because we work with kids that have attempted to hurt themselves, hurt other people, both really within 24 to 48 hours. They, come through the emergency department, the emergency room, and get cleared medically, and then a team of people decide, yeah, this person needs more psychology-based treatment than they do, say, blood work or bandages or more the physical side of things. Not that mental health isn't physical, but there's a bit of a difference. And so as they approve them, that's when we end up seeing them. And so it can be, not only tough to get permissions from families or group homes or foster care or whatever that might be, but it's also a different dynamic when they are in full-blown crisis as opposed to maybe a diagnosis that they've had for 2 months, 6 months, and they're able to process a little bit more, as opposed to, attempting to hurt themselves within, a day or so prior, or still coming off of, the effects of medication that they've taken, or all kinds of pretty intense things. It's a different dynamic and a different question that you're asking of them. So that's something I know we've had to be very cognizant of and sort of be leery of asking.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I mean, we at Sam's Fans have not even tried to showcase one of these stories with actually revealing either photos or videos or any of those details. And that just goes to show what you're saying, right? That it's a different setting. It's different conversations that need to be had. But I'm really excited or happy that you're here with us, because then we can take this initial step to at least share some of these stories in a way that is anonymous, and we're not revealing the identity or any identifying information. So that being said, I'm wondering if now would be a good time for you to tell us, from your practice as a therapist, about perhaps one story that, for any reason, that you would like to share with us. Do you have one?
Absolutely. I think one of the coolest things that I've been able to do since we've had Tyler on the unit, the other music therapist that just joined us a few months ago, really, we are able now to do some small groups sometimes. So we have a time, 2:30 to 3:30 every day is what we call leisure time. And the kids are able to do, puzzles and games and coloring and listen to music and kind of walk around the unit and enjoy their time and just have a little bit of chill time, because they do about 9 hours worth of structured group a day. So it's even more than typical school in terms of class time, for lack of a better term. And so during leisure time, Tyler and I sometimes will have a group of patients that really want to learn ukulele or really want to learn guitar. And so we have that option now, especially with both of us, to be able to take the kids into the activity center, one of the bigger rooms, and get out the ukuleles and start learning those, or work with a kid one-on-one for a half hour and start learning guitar. And I'm still able to do that by myself, but it's easier when you have another person that's able, especially in a group setting, to go around and help people, get the ukuleles tuned and play with them. And the ukuleles that Sam's Fans actually gave us, by the way, we have 8 or so on the unit that we end up using sometimes. And a lot of times we'll get kids that use that as a big coping skill. It's a way that they express a lot of what they're going through in life, and a lot of unfortunately, a lot of really traumatic experiences. And so sometimes we'll end up writing songs or just exploring new instruments and getting to have different experiences that they probably never had or been able to do. It's definitely an option for them that they wouldn't have had we not had the support of Sam's Fans and the continuing support, to be honest.
Yeah. And is there a specific child that you remember, and how the music maybe had an influence on them?
Yeah, I've had 1 or 2 patients that almost every time they unfortunately come back to the unit in crisis, have said to me, "Oh my gosh, you're still here. I'm so glad you're still here. I love music time." And sometimes they'll call me, music teacher or music class. And I'm like, well, I'm a therapist, and trying to show them how it's different than maybe a music teacher with like piano lessons or something. I've had one patient say to me, "I want to become a music therapist because of you. And now meeting Mr. Tyler, I really want to be a music therapist." And I think it's neat for, guys to be able to see a guy music therapist. And it's a new experience to have another music therapist on the unit. But in terms of other kids, a lot of times we'll get patients that are initially pretty resistant. Many of our guys have a pretty intense trauma history, so that's not always the reason why, but it can be. And just having them sit in the room, and maybe at the start of a session, they will hardly talk. They will sort of sit along the side of the wall, maybe curl up, pull their legs up to their chest, and that's about it. And as we go along in the hello song, especially with the kids that maybe have been there a day or two that know me a little bit more, as they start to jump in, then the other kids kind of see like, maybe I can enjoy this too. And so as we go through, talking about a song or writing a song or playing boomwhackers, whatever it is that we're doing in that session, a lot of times you'll see them start to open up in some way. They'll take a boomwhacker quietly and kind of keep it here and still not 100% sure, but they're more willing to participate. And usually by the end of session, we always ask if they're feeling the same, better, or worse as when they started. And many times they'll say better, or they'll say something like same, but I'm calmer, which is a form of better, in my opinion. Or even if they don't acknowledge that things have changed, sometimes I'll even say to them, "Hey man, you were really, curled up along the wall, didn't want to touch a boomwhacker, didn't want to say anything. And now you're like playing the instruments and talking with people." And sometimes they get really shy about that, and they're like, "Okay," but it is, I think important to show them and to acknowledge that they are making progress even when they don't feel like it a lot of times or don't really realize that. So that's been something that I've noticed recently. I think music has a different way of reaching people because it's one of the only mediums we know of that lights up every area of the brain.
Mhm.
And it also many times can be a comfort for anybody really anywhere, but especially people in the hospital and people who are younger, even more so. Not that 80-year-olds couldn't be comforted, but it's different when you're in the hospital as a kid, even at 17. Nobody really enjoys that, and it's a new environment, and you're doing, 9 hours worth of group a day, and nobody's really here for a happy reason or a good reason. And so I think a lot of times it's just rather unassuming for them, and something that, because they recognize the song or they're excited to see a guitar, there's different elements that just sort of draw them in and allow them to feel a bit more typical and able to express themselves and sort of willing to engage in treatment.
Yeah. Do you say that do you occasionally get to see patients individually?
Yeah, every few months or so. It depends on the batch of kids that we have, what they're able to do. Really, as I mentioned, because they're in so many groups a day, how much kind of mentally they're able to handle. I mean, it's exhausting for all of us, let alone them. So it depends, but many times when we have kids that play guitar on their own, write songs on their own, play keyboard, drum set, anything like that, I try to have some kind of one-on-one session with them. If they're a singer and they're in choir, I at least ask, "Hey, would you like a time maybe for half hour, 45 minutes where we can sit and just listen to some of your favorite music and talk about that?" And they sort of lead those sessions, which of course is completely different from groups. They're able to decide really how long we play, what instruments we play, songs we listen to or talk about, any of the stories that they want to share about their life, they're able to control all of that. And it's a different experience working one-on-one with somebody because I don't have, 8 to 11 other people in the room that I'm also keeping engaged and working with and talking about. So the conversations can be different because of that.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about this difference, right, between group and individual sessions, and I can see a lot of potential and benefits in this individual treatment and approach. So I'm wondering, do you think that potentially you would like to do more individual session, or is that also more of a decision of the whole interdisciplinary team there in the behavioral unit, or how do these decisions are made?
Yeah, it all depends on the day, really. Depends on staffing, how many people we have. But mostly I would say it depends on the kids that we have and how many of them, it's called acute, how many of them have really, really high needs kind of all the time. Then maybe it's going to be harder for me to do a one-on-one with somebody when there's, it's really loud, or we need a lot of people one-on-one with staff to kid. Sometimes that can make it more difficult. Many times I end up asking the kid exactly what time they'd like to have a session, or like, hey, I have an hour free, but it's always approved by the interdisciplinary team, their doctor, their talk therapist, which we call behavioral health therapists that also work with the families, and the other ATs, the other activity therapists, also know about it. So a lot of us collaborate in saying, hey, I think this is a smart idea. And I even check in with the nurses and say, hey, have they been really upset and now's not a good time? Or they didn't sleep well last night and they're finally asleep, just let them sleep. So sometimes that happens too. But groups for me always come first, which makes sense. And I have about 3 or 4 of those a day, typically 3 right now, which is a nice workload, able to interact with the kids and work with them and yet not feel overwhelmed. But even with 4, it's a busy day, but a good day. And so a lot of it depends on the day, but really the kid and what they're able to do.
Yeah, that's interesting, even also to see the difference between kind of in the other areas of the hospital, where I think it's mostly individual sessions. I mean, there are some groups, but I think there's a lot of individual therapy versus a behavioral health unit where it's more group based.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, that's very, very different from more of the medical side of things, as we call it. Medical side is almost entirely individual. You're in a room by yourself, and possibly because maybe people don't have mobility or a lot of pain and they're not able to move around and go different places as much. But on our unit, it's almost the exact opposite. They sleep in their own room and have their own, bathroom and things like that, but that's about it. They start groups at 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning. They eat breakfast even earlier than that, and have lunch at 11. And now with leisure time, that's different, but it's still a group setting. So it's not like a structured, formatted, but it's still, you have to do some kind of game or puzzle or coloring or something. Snack time's at 2, and then I believe there's one more snack time later in the day and another kind of wrap up leisure time group at about 7:30 at night. And so they're up pretty much 8:30 to sometimes about 9 o'clock at night in some kind of group format really all day long. And that's completely opposite of the medical side.
Yeah. Have you experienced or even heard from some of the kids any differences or anything related to the pandemic and the situation of last year and the additional stress that maybe that has brought to kids?
Absolutely. Our unit census has been a lot higher than it was the year prior. Granted, we don't have a whole lot of information to go off of year to year what our census might look like. But generally speaking, in the summers, it tends to wind down a little bit more. Over the holidays, it tends to wind down a little bit, spring break, things like that. But for the most part, our unit has been sitting at about 19 out of 24 kids total that we can have. It's sat at 19 pretty much all through the holidays. I want to say Thanksgiving, we had 11, and the year prior, we had maybe 3. Over Christmas, I want to say we had 5 or 6, and usually we had 2 or 3. So as years go on, I'm sure we'll have more averages, without COVID being around, hopefully, that'll inform our statistics a little bit more, but it's definitely been higher than we would have suspected. And on the medical floors that kind of board or house the kids that are in behavioral health crisis, they've had a lot more kids just waiting to come to our unit than the year previous, and even in years prior for them, because before this unit was open, that was the only option, was to be boarded on the medical floor. And so from that standpoint, the numbers have definitely been higher. And the kids have commented on it. It tends to be more of an underlying thing. But if you ask them, how many of you were tired of wearing masks? All the hands go up. How many of you wear masks at school? All hands go up. How's online school going? It's really crappy. And you're like, yeah, I bet it is. I have D's and F's, and I can't ask my teacher questions, and that makes me really stressed out, and I get in trouble because I don't have good grades, and all kinds of things. So I think, as with many things, it is a combination of things that brings them into the unit, but it certainly doesn't help that they can't, see friends and play sports. And I know that's been something they've mentioned a lot of, like, well, if I could be in clubs, I would be. So it's more of a passive type statement that you hear every once in a while, but it's there for sure. They're definitely aware of it.
Yeah. Now to sort of also paint a picture of how different this work is and the patients can be, what are some of the diagnoses that you see or that kids could have if they're in the behavioral health unit?
Yeah, so the two main issues that we work with is suicidal and homicidal ideation tend to be the two biggies. A little bit of aggression in terms of maybe some guys with autism and things like that, but mostly a lot of self-harm, a lot of depression, anxiety, clinical versions of both of those. Some psychotic disorders, schizophrenia spectrum disorder, where the symptoms haven't been long enough and intense enough to really get a full-blown schizophrenia specific disorder diagnosis, but symptoms are there and there's something going on that shouldn't be, with hearing and seeing things that aren't there. We've had a few of those kids here more recently. Sometimes it can be a drug use issue where they got a bad batch of weed and it ended up making them psychotic, or drinking, which can also tie in with depression and anxiety. A lot of PTSD, oppositional defiant disorder, which is, many times a lot of these kids have come from a lot of trauma, and so they don't really have opportunities to interact with adults in a healthy way and have adults that genuinely show them that they care in healthy ways. And so that can be really hard for them to work with authority figures and be told no, and clean something up because a therapist or a teacher asked you to. That can be really hard because a lot of their relationships at home are so strained, and parents and families and all different kinds of things have caused them so much stress and pain that it's like, why would I listen to you? I don't even know you. My own family hurts me, so why would I care about you or do anything you say? So there's so many layers to what a lot of these guys have, and it can show up in similar ways, but it still affects them differently. And from different avenues of life. What may give one kid a lot of depression and anxiety may not bother the next one, even though it's a very similar situation. And so it really depends on their life and, of course, their brain chemistry and genetics and all of that kind of stuff that really plays into what they have.
Yeah. So what I can imagine, which is different from, like you say, the medical side of things, where I feel that in the medical units, it's a lot of the music therapy's work is to cope with the illness, right? Both for the kid and the families. Like, how do you part of it is distraction, like we often say, but I think it obviously goes beyond that. Whereas in the behavioral unit, I can imagine a teenager, like you said, who has grown up in a family that may be difficult, has not received support growing up, issues that go on to adverse childhood experiences early on and throughout the years. And maybe, like you say, they come to a point where they might have suicidal ideation, and getting to the point of being admitted into an inpatient unit is of course a very how to say it, it's not normal, right? It's a very extreme,
intense situation. Absolutely.
situation,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then being there, and I think music and music therapy kind of take on a bit of a different edge to it, right? Where you're still working on these goals of providing distraction and so on, but I think it also goes to giving them ways of using music positively, right? And engaging with the benefits of music in their own lives, right? So where, like you said, maybe if they learn ukulele and if they learn that they can use music to express themselves, those are skills that can go beyond and can be ways for them to cope even beyond their hospitalization.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, that's one of the biggest things we focus on is healthy coping skills, healthy leisure skills, ways to spend time outside of school and get homework done and enjoy free time that doesn't involve constantly having to be around friends or constantly having other people around, spending time reading and coloring and drawing and things that many people don't really think about as leisure skills, but they are, ways of spending free time and how do we use free time in a healthy way. And, especially when a lot of families have a lot of different dynamics going on, what can I do with this time that I have alone that doesn't make me all that much more upset? And when I am upset, who can I go to and what can I do to help keep myself a little bit more regulated? And I think music can help them feel a lot better about the situation and feel like they aren't alone and able to connect on a different level. And even, communicate non-verbally with instruments and not always having to put words to what they're experiencing, but more sounds and working with volume and the intensity of how they're playing the instrument that they chose and why. That all can be a reflection of how they're feeling or how they want to feel, things they want to improve. And so it's a different avenue for them to explore how they're feeling and what they can do to help themselves out.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really want to thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and some stories with us. For anybody watching, this will be kind of your last chance to ask any questions or make any comments you may still have for Ella.
Absolutely.
But thank you so much for being here with us, but also for all the work that you do at Dayton Children's.
Absolutely. I'm glad I get to check in and give an update. I've been here almost a year and a half exactly. Started in September of 19. So it's a nice check-in time, getting close to 2 years. And I'm sure as we come out of the pandemic, that'll be a whole new world and experience for everybody as well. So it'll be neat to reconnect here and see where life takes us.
Yeah. And for us at Sam's Fans, it was a great opportunity to support the music therapy work in the behavioral health unit. It was something that was new for us because we have been supporting the medical units. Julia is saying if she can contact you to learn more about your music therapy journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm not sure how I can share my email with everybody. I just said,
What's if you
yeah, the best way probably to get in contact with me is just Guillard at childrensdayton.org. Let me just check that to make sure it's 100% true, because I tend to forget what my email is. In our system, you can just type in who you want to email and it doesn't even pull up your own email. Yep, Guillard at childrensdayton.org. So Guillard,
okay.
UILLARD, just like you see on the screen, E at Children's Dayton. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm realizing I said your last name wrong at the beginning.
You're fine. It wasn't nearly as bad as I've heard many other times.
Yeah, well, I also typed the email address into the
Wait,
chat.
it's in the chat. Perfect.
Yeah. So
That's
also, Mary Lou says thank you. Renee Dean says nice job. Ella, sounds like music therapy makes a difference in your patients. It is also evident that you love what you do. Very thankful for Sans Fans.
Absolutely.
Thank you for tuning in. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to the Power of Stories, happening every Thursday at noon Eastern Time. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Jennifer Runberg, another difficult last name. She's from a camp that we support, the Camp for Courageous Kids. So we're going to be telling some more stories. You can also, let me share, you can also check out our website where you can find out more information, check out past interviews if you missed them, or check out what's coming up. So I think that was it. Thank you so much, Ella, again. And
absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for watching. All right. Then until next time.